Hey guys, and welcome to my review for The Rings of Power Episode 3, Adar. So another one down, and I'm just gonna say right away that I didn't much enjoy this episode. And to be honest, this show in general really isn't inspiring much hope. I'll talk about that more at the end, but for now I'll just say that I'm gonna be changing the criteria for the top 5 moments for this show, as I was actually having a hard time coming up with 5 scenes I really enjoyed. However, one of the parts of this show that I do really like is catching the references to peoples and events from the books, and seeing how they integrate or adapt that history into this world. So for the Rings of Power, my top 5 moments will basically be the top 5 references I enjoyed from the books. By the way, I'll try to keep possible spoilers for the show to a minimum, but be aware they still might come up once in a while. So with that in mind, let's dive right into what I thought was the 5th best moment of the night, and that was the introduction to the island of Numenor. A central part to the history of the Second Age, and the ascension of men in this world. Numenor was an island raised by the Valar in the middle of the Sundering Seas, and I think this show did a great job displaying the majesty and grandeur of their civilization. In the books, Numenor became the most powerful realm in the world outside Valinor, with a vast maritime empire, and for the most part, I think this show demonstrated that well. I enjoyed hearing Galadriel talk about the history of Numenor and the elves, as again this is taken from the books as they were once great friends but grew estranged and then hostile when men started to resent the immortality of elves. Moving on to the number 4 spot, we stay in Numenor with the introduction to several characters, including Queen Regent Midiel, Chancellor Pharazôn, Elendil, and Isildur, all taken from the books and similarly play a central role in the fate of the kingdom. Although the show is changing the story quite a bit, especially with the addition of Galadriel, the biggest change I noticed was that the timeline has been greatly condensed. For example, in the books, the Rings of Power were forged around 1200 SA, while Isildur was born in 3209 SA. In the show, however, Isildur is already an adult, and the rings have yet to be forged. So it seems they're tying various events spread throughout the timeline all together. The relationship between Queen Midiel and Ar-Pharazôn will also be interesting to watch, as they'll both play an important role in what's to come. For the 3rd best moment of the episode, I went with the orc leader we saw at the end they called Adar. If this is Sauron as they're hinting, then I believe this is his fair form, which is no doubt referencing Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, the most beautiful form Sauron took in order to pass among and trick the elves. It'll be interesting to see if this really is Anatar, as to me this was one of the most interesting things to happen in the episode, and I'm curious to see how a wise and charming Sauron might be portrayed. For the number 2 spot, I went with Galadriel talking about Elrond and Elros. The mixed heritage brothers were born to the mightiest bloodline in all of Middle-earth, descended from human chieftains, elven kings, and even a Maya queen. As they had both human and elven ancestors, the brothers were allowed to choose their own destiny, with Elrond preferring to become an immortal elf, while Elros chose the life of a mortal man, becoming the first king of Numenor and living over 400 years. Many of the great leaders of men in the 2nd and 3rd ages, including Ar-Pharazôn and Aragorn, were descendants of Elros. Then finally, for what I felt was the best moment of the episode, I chose the elves rebelling in the orc slave camp. For me, all the scenes in this camp were the best part of the episode, as it reminded me of one of my favorite stories from the books. I really liked seeing their portrayal of captured elves, as this is one of the sadder parts of their history, with many elves really captured, tortured, and enslaved by the orcs of Morgoth and Sauron. In some cases, they were even convinced to turn against their own people, and so were released to act as spies for their secret masters. One of my favorite stories from the first stage was the tale of the elf Gwyndor, whose brother Gelmir was taken captive by the enemy in the Battle of the Sudden Flame. Hearing nothing of him for years, Gwyndor went on with his life, and led a contingent of men to fight in a great alliance against Morgoth in the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Yet victory for the allies in this battle was dependent on Gwyndor and the forces of the West staying hidden and waiting until they were signaled by the Eastern Army to attack. Knowing this was their plan, the orcs brought out Gelmir, still alive after years in captivity, and in front of everyone butchered him in a cruel, gruesome manner that so enraged his brother Gwyndor, he abandoned the plan and led his men in a mad charge against the enemy, which then caused the rest of the Western army to follow. And while they inflicted great damage upon the orcs, they fell right into Morgoth's trap, and thus lost a pivotal battle, which caused the downfall of many realms and turned the tide of war in favor of the Dark Lord. There were other interesting stories about elves taken captive as well, including one about Maedhros, the eldest son of Feanor and cousin of Galadriel, who lost his hand while a captive of the enemy until he was rescued by another cousin, Fingon. As a result of all these stories coming to mind, I really enjoyed watching these scenes, especially when they started fighting back, as the elves clearly had skills but still could not defeat the more numerous armed orcs. I like that they're not afraid to kill off elves and show limits to their abilities. The only slight criticism I have is that the orc aversion to sunlight seemed a bit exaggerated, as they were afraid of sunlight and preferred darkness, but should still be able to function in daylight if necessary. So those were my top 5 moments of the night, and like I said at the beginning, I really don't know if this show is for me. It's only been 3 episodes, but so far I'm having the same problem I did last week, as I'm finding this show incredibly boring. This time I actually took note of where I lost interest, and it was twice. First at the 29-minute mark, when Galadriel went riding on a horse. Then again at the 54-minute mark, when Galadriel goes to visit her friend in prison. At both of those times, I found myself reaching for my phone or losing all interest in what was happening. I don't think it was the specific scenes I didn't like, just that it all felt so soulless. It's probably not a fair comparison, but since I'm reviewing both shows, I can't help but think about my experience with the Rings of Power as opposed to House of the Dragon. Although it's only been 3 episodes for the House of the Dragon, they're already making me feel things, and I'm invested in the story and characters. For me, none of that is true with the Rings of Power. Although much of the show is beautiful and the acting is good, I don't find the dialogue well written, nor the characters compelling. When I watched House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones in the early seasons, there were moments where I was legitimately tense, where my heart beat faster or my jaw dropped because of something surprising, where I cheered for something joyous or got teary-eyed over an emotional scene. It didn't happen all at once, but even in the first few episodes of those shows, I was experiencing some of those emotions. Yet I haven't had that for the Rings of Power, with perhaps the sole exception being the War of Wrath scene in the opening of episode 1, which I very much enjoyed. Since then, nothing has captivated me, and I can only hope things will improve in the next few episodes. Even the Hobbit scenes, which I previously enjoyed, are becoming tiresome, as the Nori character is acting increasingly selfish in a way I don't enjoy. To me, Hobbit adventurers are compelling because they're reluctant heroes, who ultimately long for hearth and home. But she seems determined to pursue her ambitions, no matter how much it might hurt those around her. I think I would like this character better if she stumbled into adventure, despite her best efforts to focus on caring for her family. Overall, I gave this episode a 4 out of 10, as there were certain things I liked, but as a whole, it just couldn't keep my interest. So that's it for my review of the Rings of Power Episode 3. What did you guys think of this one? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, be sure to check out my spoiler-free Prelude to the Rings of Power video, as well as my spoiler-filled videos about the Rings of Power, Kingdom of Numenor, and Second Age, which go over all the events of this period in detail. Links found below. So that's it for now. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and check out the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.